Bernard Sloane had the perfect family. They were always there, waiting for him when he finished work. Every evening at 7 o'clock, he put out the lights, locked the front door, and went downstairs to the basement to spend the evening with his family. His wife Jenny would be sitting on the couch knitting a sweater. His mother was always dozing in her easy chair. His son Ben and his daughter Emma were usually sitting at the table playing a board game. Little Luke lay on the floor playing with his toys, while little Martha, the youngest, sat at the piano. Bernard would sit down in his big comfy chair and chat with them until bedtime. He told them all about his day and who had died recently in town. He would repeat funny stories and jokes he heard and tell them his views and opinions on any subject that came to mind. They always listened patiently and never argued or contradicted him. When it was time to go to bed, Bernard would yawn and stretch his arms. He would go around giving them all kisses on the cheek and saying, "Well, good night everyone, pleasant dreams." Then he would turn out the lights, climb the stairs, and lock the door behind him when he went to bed. Middleton was a small town, and Bernard was the only undertaker in the area. His funeral parlor was also his home, and he got all the business there was. Although he didn't have any close friends, he was well known, respected, and above suspicion. Everything went like clockwork. People would bring their dead loved ones to him, and Bernard would embalm them and prepare them for burial. The funeral was usually held in the local church, and the dead were buried in the local graveyard. One day, as Bernard was cleaning up at the funeral parlor, a policeman came to the front door. "I'm here about the periwinkle child," said the policeman. Bernard had a puzzled frown on his face. "The periwinkle child?" "Yeah, Martha Periwinkle," said the policeman. "The little girl who drowned 5 months ago." "Oh, yes, of course," said Bernard. "I remember now." "Well, I'll level with you, Mr. Sloane. The family had her body exhumed, and when they opened the coffin, they got quite a surprise shock. There was nothing but stacks of old newspapers inside of it." "Oh my God," said Bernard. "How terrible." "Now look, Mr. Sloane," the policeman said. "Theft of a dead body is a criminal offense. If you cooperate, we'll go easy on you. The family just wants their daughter's remains so they can give her a proper burial." Bernard was highly offended. "I've been in business in Middleton for 20 years, he said. "Everybody knows me. How could you think I would do such a thing?" "Then you won't mind if I search your house?" the policeman said. Bernard's face suddenly turned pale. "I certainly do mind," he said. "This is my home as well as my place of business. I know my rights as a citizen. I'm not going to have anybody snooping through my private property without a search warrant." "If that's the way you want to do it, that's fine by me," the policeman growled. "I'll be back in an hour with a search warrant. In the meantime, I'll leave an officer outside to make sure you don't try to get rid of any evidence." Bernard watched as the policeman turned and left. He shut the front door and stood there thinking for a few minutes. Then he went downstairs to the basement to see his family. He opened the curtains and let some light into the room for the first time. His wife was still sitting knitting. His mother was still dozing on the couch. Ben and Emma were still playing their board game. Luke was still playing with his toys. And Martha was still at the piano. Somehow, they all seemed a little withered, less like living people than like mummies. Only Martha, the new girl, looked as fresh as she had been on the day she drowned. Bernard let out a deep sigh. He picked up a container of gasoline and began splashing around the basement room. He splashed it all over his wife, his mother, and each one of his children. Then he kissed them all on the forehead and sat down in his chair. He loved them all so much, and he couldn't bear to see his family torn apart. He reached into his pocket and took out a box of matches. He selected one match, struck it, and the entire room burst into flames. "Pleasant dreams, everybody!" he screamed as the fire engulfed him. "Pleasant dreams!" There was a young boy who lived in Russia. One evening his parents went out and they left him home alone. They told him to get himself ready and go to bed no later than 10 p.m. They warned him they would return after midnight, and if he was still up, there would be hell to pay. The boy started playing games on the computer and lost track of time. He looked at the clock and realized it was already 5 minutes after 11. He was about to go to the bathroom and to brush his teeth when the phone rang. Thinking it was his parents checking up on him, the boy let it ring for a while. Then he picked up the phone, pretended to be tired and yawned loudly and said, "Hello?" "Hello," replied an unfamiliar male voice on the other end. "Is there a dead body in your apartment?" I don't think so," replied the boy, more than a little surprised. "Can you check, please?" asked the voice. "We will call back in 5 minutes." The caller hung up and the boy just stood there astonished. The phone call disturbed him. Why would anyone think there was a corpse in his apartment? What kind of question was that? What scared him the most was the mysterious caller's use of the word "we." He picked up the phone again and tried to call his mom and dad on their cell phones. He kept calling them, but they didn't answer. They had probably switched their phones off, he thought. As soon as he hung up, the phone rang again and he immediately answered it. "Well, is there a dead body?" asked the voice. I haven't searched yet," the boy replied. "Well, what are you waiting for?" demanded the voice. "You think the corpse will just find itself? We'll call back in 5 minutes." The boy went around the entire apartment looking here and there, but there was no corpse. The phone rang again. "Well, did you find it?" No, nope, nowhere." "And you searched the whole apartment?" the voice asked. "Yes, every room," said the boy. "And in the cupboards? Under the beds?" No." "Well, have a look," the voice growled. "What's the matter with you? Have you never played hide and seek? We will call back in 5 minutes." The boy walked around the apartment. He looked in all the closets, under all the beds. He even checked the balcony. There was no corpse. The phone rang again. "Well, did you find it?" "No, there's no dead body here." "Okay, perhaps we have the wrong apartment." The voice laughed and hung up. The boy was confused by the phone calls, but he knew his parents would be home soon. He didn't want to get in trouble, so he quickly got undressed and hopped into bed. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he thought he heard the front door of the apartment quietly open and close. Then soft footsteps came down the hallway. Sometime after midnight, the boy's parents came home. When they walked into the apartment and turned on the light, they were confronted by a horrible sight. Their son was hanging lifeless from the ceiling. A rope was tied around his neck and his eyes were wide open, frozen in a look of terror. His mother screamed. Just then the phone rang. His father answered it. "Hello," said an unfamiliar voice. "Is there a dead body in your apartment?" William Kemp hated his wife. They'd been married for 20 years and he was tired of hearing her nagging voice. He was sick of listening to her criticize and belittle him every day. He was fed up with the way she ordered him around as if he was a slave. William intended to get rid of his wife once and for all. He had planned everything perfectly. When his wife came home that evening, she put the groceries in the fridge and told her husband to start cooking dinner. Instead, William told her that he had a surprise for her. He knew she loved surprises. "It's in the basement," he said with a smile. As his wife made her way down the stairs into the darkened basement, William took a meat cleaver from the kitchen drawer and followed her. Minutes later, he was wiping the sweat from his brow. He never thought chopping up a woman's body would be such hard work. There were 6 pieces in all: head, arms, legs, and torso. He carefully wrapped up each piece in newspaper and tied it neatly with a piece of rope. When he had finished, there were 6 tidy bundles sitting at his feet. William picked them up and tossed them into the deep freeze. Then he shut the door and secured it with a padlock. After mopping the basement floor, he went back upstairs to wash the meat cleaver in the kitchen sink. Leaning back in his armchair, William let out a sigh of relief. He was free. If anyone asked, he would tell them that his wife had run off with another man. Nobody would suspect that she was really in the basement freezer. He started drifting off to sleep. The house was peaceful and quiet, very quiet, except for the bumping sound. William sat up straight and listened. Something flopping and thunding around the basement stairs. The noise was getting closer and closer. Suddenly, William woke up. He knew it was just a dream, but it all seemed all too real. His heart was pounding and sweat was dripping down his face. He opened the kitchen drawer and took out the meat cleaver. Then he went back down into the basement to check the deep freeze. It was still securely locked. He was about to go back upstairs when he noticed something on the floor. A chill ran down his spine. It was a sheet of bloody newspaper. William unlocked the deep freeze and looked inside. To his horror, he realized that it was empty. All 6 packages were missing. As he stood there in stunned silence, he thought he saw moving out of the corner of his eye. A shadow scuttled across the floor behind him. He whirled around, but there was nothing there. Just then he heard a click and the lights in the basement went out. He was plunged into darkness. Then he heard a rustling sound. It came closer and closer until it seemed to be coming from all sides. He was surrounded. William backed up against the wall and began swinging the meat cleaver wildly into the darkness. He couldn't see a thing. All he could hear was the horrible rustling of newspaper. Then, all of a sudden, something slithered between his legs. He felt icy fingers wrap around his neck. He tried to scream, but nothing would come out. Something grabbed the meat cleaver from his hand, and he felt the fingers around his neck tighten, choking him until he was unconscious. It wasn't until weeks later that the police searched the basement. They opened the deep freeze, and inside they found the lifeless, frozen body of William Kemp. He was surrounded by the dismembered body parts of his wife. A young boy is sleeping in his bed on a usual night. He hears footsteps outside his door and peeks out of his eyes to see what's happening. His door swings open quietly to reveal a murderer carrying the corpses of his parents. After silently propping them up on a chair, he writes something on the wall in the blood of the dead bodies. He then hides under the child's bed. The child is scared beyond belief. He can't read the writing on the wall, and he knows the man is under his bed. Like any child, he pretends that he slept through the whole thing and hasn't awoken yet. He lays still as the bodies, quietly hearing the breaths from under his bed. An hour passes, and his eyes are adjusting more and more to the darkness. He tries to make out the words, but it's a struggle. He gasps when he finally makes out the sentence, "I know you're awake." He feels something shift underneath the bed.